Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Unicorn Dispatch Live with your host, Bryson, Bort, founder and CEO of Scythe, where I bring what I think are interesting people and interesting ideas that I see all over. And I've known Steve for a while, so this is an interesting person and an interesting idea I wanted to do for some time. So Steve, why don't we start with an intro, who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a partner in Artico Search's cybersecurity practice. We focus on recruiting, my team specifically focuses on recruiting CISOs and their teams. So anything cyber leadership related, CISOs for Fortune 500s, Fortune 250s, Fortune 100s, as well as team members for those organizations. We do quite a bit in private equity and venture capital, both at the fund level and the portfolio company level in terms of cyber leadership. And I got to know you, Bryson, through being a faculty member at IONS. And so through the IONS community, we have presented multiple times over the course of many weeks this year and in previous years.
Yeah, so Steve and I are both IONS faculty, and we run the in-person CISO roundtables that happen in different cities. There's also a virtual roundtable we do through IONS for CISOs, which I think is really interesting. For me, I love to teach and helping make a difference, but what's also really cool and what I always tell everybody in attendance is we've got good content, but it's those CISOs that make it great because them sharing their stories, their insights. It's better than just here's the framework, here's the ivory tower guy who's saying how I've heard it done, and it's divorced from reality, right? It's tied to their experiences and what works and what doesn't work. And on that, Steve has done a lot of research with the community, which I always think is great because we get, particularly in cybersecurity, I feel like we have a lot of opinions. We have a lot of feelings, but they're not grounded in data, right? They're not grounded beyond anecdote. And so Steve's done a lot of research. Steve, why don't you talk about a lot of the sort of the scope of what you've accomplished?
Yeah, so in addition to the recruiting day job that I have, part of being an IONS faculty member is going back 4 or 5 years ago when their chief product officer and I sat down and said, there's a lot of misinformation related to security budgeting, security organizational design, and specifically CISO compensation. And so there was a lot of misinformation about what those bands were. I know that practitioners were constantly in conflict with HR teams saying, you're asking me to go get a security architect for $120,000 who's done this in AWS for 5 years. That person doesn't exist. And so we decided to partner with IONS as a third-party research vendor and third-party research institution to really go to practitioners like those watching this stream and saying, can you participate in this survey? It started out as just CISOs and just compensation. Now we go to the entire security stack. Basically, anybody that's in security can participate. We ask about compensation. We ask about reporting. We ask about how often you get in front of the board and the cadence there. We ask about org design and security budgeting. And it just gives us this treasure trove of aggregated information that we release dozens of analytical reports on that are basically on those topics that I just described. So it's really accelerated into something just this anthology of data that is not only backed by what you, the practitioners, are telling us, but it's also supplemented by what Matt Cummins, my business partner, and I see out there talking to people like you every day. So it's a combination of all that where it's the data the stories that are all combined to really come up with a great narrative of what is actually happening out there that people can go to their HR teams, their hiring managers, and say, yeah, we have these preconceived notions and this validates it or doesn't, and they could have real discussions.
So what's the most surprising thing that you found that was counterintuitive to what we always just think versus, oh, wait, hold on, the data proves otherwise?
So I think that maybe it wasn't super surprising when you actually took a step back, but we're in a position where we don't know as a society or as a community or as a business world what CISO actually means. And you could meet CISOs who are really directors of security engineering with a team of one that are in the weeds and technical and really in systems. And you could have a CISO who doesn't know how to code and has never known how to code and is really focused on the board level reporting, the cross-functional influence. We particularly see that at large scale enterprises in financial services, for example, where it's so much about relationship building, be it with regulators or internally or with other senior leaders. And I think that although we see that there are table stakes for what CISOs are responsible for, we haven't really coalesced around what the title actually means and what the scope of responsibility is holistically. Unlike a CFO or general counsel, where if you meet a CFO, in an airport at a party, you have a cousin who's a CFO, a brother-in-law is a CFO, a sister-in-law is a CFO. You know what they do, and you know what their day-to-day looks like. We have not really gotten there with CISO, despite us being in probably 10 years of a 30-year revolution.
So what is a CISO?
So I think at this point, the good news is I do think that we have table stakes of what that means. And our data suggests that it's just nuts and bolts of security, security operations, security programming, some technical risk elements as well. But it really does depend. And even though a CISO job spec may look like a CISO job spec, a lot can tell you out of the reporting relationship, how often this person has a cadence with the board of directors. Do they serve on committees? What's really the seniority level here? And so again, is the CISO in this role a CISO in title, but really in practice, a security engineering leader? Or is this really a strategic CISO? And in our data, we break this down as the tactical CISO, the functional CISO, the strategic CISO. And that's not necessarily to say that you are one or the other. It's what position are you filling today? How does the organization think about the role? What access does it give the role? And how often are you really doing what senior leaders at the executive ranks should be doing and where your cross-functional peers are spending their time?
So you said that that's something that can change, right? And certainly there's a level of influence that can drive that change from the CISO. So this is something we talk about in our roundtables. And one of the things I teach in that roundtable is influencing versus owning digital risk. And part of what makes the CISO job so difficult is they don't own the risk. They are consultants to the risk, right? At the end of the day, they represent this security structure that's there to assure the business, but in a support fashion. There's not necessarily the accountability, the responsibility, the ownership of those systems, of those functions, of those organizational leaders. So it's a supportive element. And this gets into where I see the kind of tired conversation on, so CISOs be technical or not? And one of the things I importune the attendees every time is your people don't really understand your job and what you do. Right? Having the technical versus non-technical debate is missing the point of a CISO, right? They should be technical enough, right? It's not that they shouldn't be technical at all. I mean, they have to understand what their organization does, but back to that influence versus ownership role that they have and the question of what the role even is inside that company, in other companies, what the role means writ large has meant, I think, that there's a lot of opportunity for education. One, education of their own technical people on what they do, education of the business on how to work with them. And that's challenging because, excuse me, we see a lot of these positions don't report directly to the board, which I think people assume they do. They're doing this where they may not have a lot of formal risk process. So it's a lot of informal ad hoc with leadership while they're trying to get the attention and the education. Anything further that you can add there, Steve?
Yeah, I think that my practice and my role, and I think that this is the alignment with SITH and the alignment with IANS, is that we're all trying to empower leaders to move, cyber leaders to move from technical leader to business risk executive. And in an environment where upwards of 70% of CISOs have only led technical teams, only led technical budgets, only reported into tech, you've been trained and conditioned for a job that isn't the CISO job as it really needs to be. And so by getting the community together, by leveraging partners, by doing advanced education, by listening to webinars like this, I think it helps position people to move from that tech leader. You've got the bona fides there for the most part. You need to move your career to business risk executive. The conversation is different. The words are different. The framework are different. And so you want to be a business risk executive with a major in cybersecurity. And so how do we enable people to be able to do that in a more cohesive way and in a more executive oriented way?
So what are some other recommendations and insights on the CISO role that you think technical practitioners could benefit from? So we're not talking to CISOs now, we're talking to the folks who work for the CISO and generally don't understand what the CISO does.
Yeah, I think it's getting more and more embedded informally or formally with cross-functional leaders. and people who can be champions and serve as your eyes and ears in the room where you can't be. There's only one CISO at the organization. They can only be one place at one time. But if you have team members that are going out and they're evangelizing on behalf of the program, and even if they're having lunch or coffee with cross-functional people, their own peers who maybe it's not the general counsel or the head of product, but it's people on those teams. It's not the general manager, but it's a product manager. I think that the grassroots effort and the bottoms-up campaign of let me tell you what we're working on and how it applies to the broader framework of the organization and the objectives of the organization. And you could even take it one step further, which is here's what's going on at the macro level. Here's how I think that affects the business holistically. Here's my piece of it. What about you? And I think that being able to do that, these aren't just techie, wonky people in a back office. These are actually business-oriented, business-focused leaders and people in the security organization. And that can elevate everybody in the security group.
Do you have any insights on who becomes a CISO? Right? Like I'm 5-10 years into my career now. Are there things I can do to eventually become a CISO? Do I want to become a CISO? And then I'm going to even like muddy the waters further. Is there going to be even a future CISO role for me in 10 to 15 years?
Yeah. So I think the introspective piece is a good place to start of what do you like to do? Do you like to solve technical problems, be in the weeds, be in the platforms and firefight? Do you want to be the one running into the building post-breach? There's opportunity for all of these paths. And so thinking about that, that's probably not the CISO profile. The CISO profile is probably more, I like building cross-functional relationships. I like thinking broadly about the business. I want to understand a balance sheet and a P&L. I'm reading investor reports. I'm reading analyst reports. I'm listening to quarterly business reviews. I'm going through our 10K. If you have a natural affinity for that, then you're probably better positioned than many of your peers to go into cyber leadership and eventually get to the CISO role. Now, I think the other piece of this is if you look at our state of the CISO report and you think about these three cohorts that I described, the tactical, the functional, and the strategic CISO, it's where do you want to focus your time? What do you aspire to be? Because I have people that say, I'm a tactical CISO. I'm a technical CISO. I like that. I work for small health tech organizations, fintech organizations, SaaS organizations, whatever the case may be. I like being close to the technology. I don't really aspire to get involved in the politics of board reporting and senior leadership and things like that. That's great. So you have to figure out, how does your organization view the role? How do you view your own aspirations in the context of how your organization views it? And then take it from there and try to build your career there, or find a spot where it's really fitting from an aspiration and a skill set standpoint. And it's also challenging and fun for you. So that's how I would think about this, and thinking about the environment, not only of what you can control, but there's only so much that you can change as an individual too. You may aspire to be that strategic CISO. You may be mired in that functional CISO realm. And the organization is just, that's it. That's how they're going to view security. That's how they're going to view security the entirety of your tenure, and likely the next person as well. So being honest about that will be helpful as you try to manage your career.
So how do I learn to read a P&L sheet, right? I mean, you talk about the affinity for that. I think most people are like, yeah, that sounds cool. I'd love to read the 8K. I'd love to read the P&L. I'd love to read a balance sheet. I don't know what I'm looking for. Like, where do I even start?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, this is where Google and AI platforms are your friend. You know, I think that there is, if you went to an AI platform and said, break down a quarterly report for me. This is all in the public realm, right? So these systems have access and it's already included. Tell me what I should be looking for. Tell me how to understand this balance sheet. What are some pitfalls for a company when I want to evaluate the financial health of an organization? What should I be targeting? Put specific ones in there. I mean, you know, the barrier to entry on business acumen has never been lower. You don't have to go to business school. You don't have to go to Carnegie Mellon's cyber boot camp for business executives to be able to understand this stuff. And listen to what your CEO is saying in an analyst call, because they're going to be speaking a business language. They're not going to be talking a technical language, and just understanding, they told us that the objective of the business over the next 12 months was X, Y, and Z. Here's how this is articulated to the street, or this is how it's articulated to our private equity investors, or whatever the case may be. Just be really in tune with that and take it upon yourself to go out. The other thing too is that'll get you so far. Go ask people in your finance department, ask cross-functional peers. Hey, you know, I was looking at this document and I have questions. People love to talk about what they're good at. They love to show their expertise off to people. And if you go in good faith and say, I've got this to the 10-yard line, help me understand it more fully, I think the right people and the right champions in your organization would be more than happy to do that over lunch or coffee. And by the way, it doesn't suck to be seen with those people in the lunchroom, cafeteria, grabbing coffee, because those optics really do help.
One of the other things that I like to point out is if your company is publicly listed, so that annual report that they're required to file, one of the interesting things that's going to be in there is they're going to be talking about what they're going to be investing in. They're also going to be talking about how they analyze risk. So you get basically the CEO, CFO, COO, and the board signing off on saying, these are the risks that we see inherent to our business, which is mandatory to do for a public company. And you're going to see how they prioritize cybersecurity, because that is going to be one of those risks. Now, I'm already going to help you out. It's not going to be the number one risk to them. So what we've seen is, on average, the board tends to evaluate cybersecurity as a class of risk, somewhere between 3 and 5 in terms of the top 5 priorities, which has been a growth in the businesses taking this more seriously, but still puts you where they overall rank you, right? So there's a lot of debate again on, well, security is not a cost center. Well, we are mostly a cost center, and we're not, again, even the number one risk. And you can see that. You can see how the business looks at that, and that can give you an idea of the kind of requirements and challenge the CISO and the security organization faces in that organization, because it explains how the leadership interprets and prioritizes them at that organization, because they've stated it. They have to.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I think there were practitioners out there who a couple summers ago expected the SEC to require cyber experts on boards and really make this a governance problem to be solved. That's not the way that the business world is looking at this today. And it's not the way they're going to be looking at it in any time in the near future. This is an operational challenge to manage the risk and not a governance challenge to be solved, which means that we have corporate directors who know more than they did 5 years ago, but many practitioners would say not enough about cyber risk in general. And so there's an education that has to happen from the CISO to them. But there are also opportunities in training for those individuals too. I had the opportunity to talk at the National Association of Corporate Directors. They had a cyber and AI masterclass, and they had 100 and something corporate directors, public corporate directors, in a room talking about how to think about cyber and AI from a governance perspective. So these conversations are being had. It's just not going to be a regulatory body saying you must do this or that, like we saw with the qualified financial expert coming out of 2008, 2009, 2010.
All right. So now, of course, the CISO doesn't do this by themselves, and the CISO starts to exist at a different verticals of companies of different size. So let's talk about that. What is the composition of a company that first starts to have a CISO? And then from there, the CISO now appears because there's enough of a team already, and then that's added onto it. So can you start to give us some of those insights into where a CISO appears, what the team tends to look like, what the differences are in different kinds of companies or organizations that then create this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we walk through what this looks like in our reports, where we go from smaller cap to mid cap to fortune cap, and what these organizational designs look like. I'll start off by talking about a project that we did last year, because I think it's very relevant to this discussion, where we had a company that was venture capital backed, had just raised $100 million Series B, which is a lot of money for a Series B company. And they came to us and they said, we want to do a CISO search. And my first response was, you have 85 people. Are you sure you want to do CISO search, or do you want to do direct security engineering search? They said, no, we want to do CISO search. I said, okay. And then we walked them through, do you want a technical person? Do you want a strategic CISO? How do you want them spending their time? They said, no, we want a strategic CISO, somebody who could build the program, be in front of customers. Yeah, there'll be a technical component, but we really want a strategic individual. I said, okay, great. And they said it'd be great if they had the title and they've been in the role for a while. So we presented 3 or 4 of those prototypes, and I had a feeling that this was not really what they were looking for. And they met these 3 people. They said, yeah, they're great, but they're not really engineering focused enough. I said, okay. So you want a director of security engineering? What you want? They said, no, we want a CISO. We want a CISO. I said, okay. How about we take this person who's basically a director of security engineering, but has a CISO title, and we introduce them? Bingo. That's what we're looking for. And so that person is reporting directly to a co-founder and a CTO with the dotted line to the CEO. Fairly earlier in their career, more technically driven, not as much strategic than tactical. And we see that there are fewer layers between that individual and the CEO, because there are fewer layers in the organization. There's a company of 100 or fewer people. Over the course of time, that individual will very likely be layered in with what they said that they wanted before, but they weren't quite ready for it. So as an organization expands to pre-IPO, they file an S1, they get ready to transact, they've done a couple of roll-ups, they've tripled the size of the business over 3 years, and now they want to transact to another PE firm or whatever the case may be. There's probably a different level of maturity and a different cadence that you need, which is less technically focused and more about due diligence in acquisitions, making sure the integration is going well, making sure that there's an alignment so that you don't want security to be the critical path to a transaction, be it an IPO or a private equity transaction, or whatever the case may be. You definitely do not want that, right? So you want to be able to get ahead of that. And ideally, it's somebody who has some level of maturity to know what the pitfalls are there. And over the course of time, that continues to expand. So when you have that director level CISO, one or maybe 2 levels underneath them, that'll grow over time as well. So you end up managing individual contributors at first, then some managers with small teams, then managers of managers. And we see the organization continue to expand and evolve. And by the way, you're going to get further removed from the CEO at that point as well, just by the nature of the scaling organization and layering in. So we see that from a reporting standpoint, who's the closest to the CEO? It's the companies under 200 million and the companies over 10 billion. And you're like, well, why is that? Totally different profiles, different cohorts, different groups of people, different candidates, different successful placements. But that's a different point of the journey.
Yeah. So here's a question that's kind of a curveball, but I think you're going to be able to answer it. For CISOs who are wanting to implement AI-based solutions to automate tier 1 SOC duties, would that be more costly than hiring tier 1 SOC analysts to ensure alerts are being handled properly? So I want to first correct a perception here. CISOs aren't the ones who are bringing AI to the company. CISOs are having to deal with the fact that AI is being brought to the company. So the core organization is interested in artificial intelligence for efficiency and functionality that their core revenue line is able to take advantage of. And the CISO is then forced to do that. Now, that's not to say there isn't also AI being considered in security solutions, but the primary adoption of AI is actually being driven by the business, not by the CISO.
Yeah, that's accurate. So there's 2 parts to this question that I want to address. One is more abstract and one is directly to the question. Let's start directly to Jeffrey's question. So in all of the CISO roundtables that Bryson and I have been at over the last 8 or 9 weeks, I have yet to hear one person say that any AI solution in security is replacing anybody in their organization. I have not heard that at all. What we've heard is it's supplementing some of the more tactical tasks. It's streamlining many of the questionnaires and assessments and vendor piece that are required. But you still need somebody to administer, interpret, and manage these solutions, at least today. Now, that could change. These things move a mile a minute, and that could change in 6 months. But as of right now, it's hard to say, well, what's the cost-benefit analysis of replacing a person with an AI? Because we haven't seen that yet. There's ancillary tasks that are very time-consuming that are being absorbed into AI solutions. But again, you still need somebody to manage, interpret, and really present that to the leadership. So that's directly addressing the question. The other point, as we talk about AI, and this will talk to Bryson's point as well, which is your organization is going to have a perspective on AI, if not already, then soon enough. And they very likely may have an AI steering committee or something similar to that. You want to have security's voice in the room in those conversations. And I know that in an environment where most people are experiencing pretty significant crunch in terms of my scope is increasing, my team and my budgets are not keeping pace with that, I'm stretched really thin, I'm asking a lot of my team, something's going to break at some point. You need to be in the room and have the voice of security in the room when these decisions are being made, because your company is going to come up with an AI policy and guidelines around how they're going to implement and use it. And if security's voice is not in the room, you're going to be relitigating conversations that have already been happened with decisions that have already been decided. And so I can't stress enough, it's really important to get ahead of that, even if it's something you're like, one more thing that I need to do. You're going to be saving time later for sure.
Okay, so here's another one. So as I'm a CISO, right, I've already got a team, which means I'm now going to have hiring and firing capabilities. And part of that is, as a CISO or security leader, do we ask current or past salaries during the interview? I think this trips a little bit into HR policy, but I think it's still a good question.
And definitely one that I can answer, because we have to advise clients on this all the time. So Going back about 5 or 6 years, we had pay equity laws that were enacted by states. We don't have a federal standard for that yet, but depending on the state, you can or can't ask what somebody is making today. There's an easy way to really work around this. And I think it's fair to everybody to ask, what would be your expectations for this type of role? And people may say back to me, well, what's the range for the role? The range for the role is usually pretty big, because if you think about what corporate bands look like, you're like, oh my gosh, like this band goes from 180K to 220K. Okay, that's okay, that's fine. But what about the ones that go from 180 to like 300? You're like, how do we fit that in? I think the best advice here, as you're looking for a new role yourself, is to understand what the market rate is for similar type positions. So asking your network, asking your mentors, asking your Slack channels. You don't even have to give the company name. You can, that could be helpful. But if you want to be more abstract about it, you could say, hey, for a $500 million B2B SaaS company that's in the enterprise space with a team of 15, what should I expect that total compensation to be? And how do I think about that? You can leverage our reports as well, but validating that with what you're seeing in your network and getting a sense of what's required of the role and trying to figure out, well, how do they think about this? Because if they're telling you that this is the most strategic role ever and it's the highest of the organization and you're going to have all this access to the board and senior leadership, and they say, well, what's the OTE? And they say 210K. It's probably not true, right? So that can tell you quite a bit too, and it can align you on, is this really a tactical role or is this really a strategic role?
So what are the average salaries for CISOs?
Anywhere from like $250 to $6 million. How's that for a range?
How do I get $6 million there, Steve?
So we see the biggest compensation packages are in West Coast based, large scale, publicly traded tech companies. Think about the FANGs. You think about one level down from there. Even some that are 200 Fortune 250 companies, they're paying their CISOs quite significantly, majority in equity. So the cash usually tops out between 700-800, and it's the equity that makes the rest of that 2 million, 3 million, 6 million, whatever it is. From a financial services perspective, so we think about East Coast, we think about predominantly New York, the large scale banks, it's a much more heavily cash package versus equity, but those could be in the multi-millions of dollars as well. And most of those are primarily risk-based roles rather than the technical security roles that you would see in tech. So different profiles, different candidates. Although we have seen, Apple hired somebody from Capital One, for example. We do see a little bit of transition from the banks to tech. We don't typically see from the tech to banks. It's not unheard of, but it's much easier to go from highly regulated to less regulated or not unregulated rather than vice versa.
All right. The questions are pouring in now. Do you see any differences in what organizations are looking for in a CISO in different industry verticals, specifically higher ed?
So within higher ed and nonprofit in general, and I know that there's some for-profit higher ed, but that's kind of the special case. And I don't even know that the compensation would be that different. We typically see organizations looking for broader experience because they want their CISOs to do more with fewer people and less budget. So we see much more resourcing and larger teams and larger budgets in other areas compared to higher ed and any non-for-profit called nonprofit hospitals or any other NGOs, where they want CISOs who are a little bit more tactical and a little bit more nimble because the teams are lighter than in other sectors.
All right. Given the rapidly evolving threat landscape, how do you prioritize investments between emerging technologies like AI-driven security tools versus strengthening foundational cybersecurity practices? So that's outside of the HR question, but what skills or qualities do you look for when hiring someone to join your security team? So I'm going to get back to just answering the first part on prioritization, because this is what I work with these executives in. I mean, there's no answer. It's the consulting answer of it depends, because it is so unique to each individual set of organization, culture, leadership, priorities, timing, who they have, what they think they can do. Now, we see and we make fun of throughout industry numerous times where we see purchases of some security tool, which is going to solve everything and at the cost of the foundational things. Because one of the harsh realities is anytime I buy something, I've now given myself more work, because at the end of the day, it's not the installation of the tool. which should take a significant amount of effort because I should install it properly and configure it properly for me. And then because security is a constant fight against gravity, I have to invest in maintaining the tool or else it has no value. And so that is a significant back end of invisible requirements that a lot of executives don't think about when they're pushing these ideas. And so I am sacrificing the ability to work on another priority, which most likely is a foundational best practice, versus now having to chase the latest and greatest thing that I was first forced to purchase, buy, install, and maintain. Again, going back to the AI security tool set, right? That's just the du jour. So the idea there is that, first of all, let me just explain to everyone what artificial intelligence means, because this comes up and a lot of people don't realize it. Artificial intelligence is a knowledge management revolution. Previously, we were in a data information stage, right? Everything was about getting data where we could have it. Now it's the knowledge, it's the context of the data. It's the fact I can apply thought around different disparate data sets and I can get usable answers. That's what AI represents. And so the ability to bring some of that automated thinking and rationale beyond what would bore a tier one SOC analyst is advantageous. Again, the CISOs aren't driving this adoption. This is being pushed from the business side. And then in the cases of AI into security, it's because there are going to be knowledge advantages to that. I'm going to be able to get more out of a SOC. I'm going to get more efficient SOC. I can work with tier one analysts who don't necessarily have as much training because I can support them with a context-driven system. Steve, anything you want to add to that, but then specifically to the skills or qualities you look for?
I think when we talk about prioritization, the best advice in terms of prioritizing, change management, getting the most out of your program and getting buy-in from others in the organization is prioritize your operational programming in the context of the priorities for the business. So if you are in tune with what's going on in the business and you know that these are the priorities of over the next 3 to 6 months from a business standpoint, there are very likely security implications to that. If the priority is to grow significantly through some M&A, then you're going to have to allocate resources for some of that due diligence, which if your team is not scaling, that means that you're going to have to reshuffle some of your priorities on your team. And so whether you're talking about investments in tooling versus more OpEx operational security, whatever the case may be, matching what you're doing from a functional standpoint with where the business is going and how they're articulating their priorities will help in terms of having the conversation of, yes, we can do that, and here are the implications, which is different than no, because, or yes, if. It's just, yeah, I mean, we can absolutely do that. Here's what's going to happen as a consequence of that. So that's how I think about prioritization in security, and really any operational, functional, programmatic prioritization. What skills or qualities do you look for when hiring somebody? I mean, it depends on the organization. I think that there are specific roles. If I'm looking for a threat hunter and I want somebody really focused on threat intel, then I want somebody who's been in that environment and is like 10 miles deep in that. They don't have to be broad at all. But our research indicates that most security practitioners at an entry level and mid-management level, they're majoring in some areas and minoring in several others. So hiring for upside, thinking about people who are smart, strategic, intellectually curious, people who are lifelong learners. Ask people what books they've read, what podcasts do they listen to, how do they think about security in the context of other areas of life too. How do they occupy their time outside of work? I think trying to assess for upside in terms of, yes, I have a security engineer that I need to hire. It would be great if they had Azure experience, or maybe not. Maybe it's just somebody really smart who's coming out of your tech group. Maybe somebody internally who has an affinity to learn something new in security, is a good culture fit, and is sort of topped out where they are in the IT side of things. So thinking more creatively and thinking about, where do I see this person not only in the next role, but maybe 2 roles from now, and can we keep them engaged, and are they high performer, somebody that I would be willing to bet my organization's operational cadence on, who I can really grow and scale into something different over the course of time.
And yet another question. So in your experience, how does the IT audit function contribute to preparing someone for a CISO role? And when making that transition, which skills tend to carry more weight, technical depth or business and strategic acumen? So IT audit comes under GRC. And again, this is another space that I think is misunderstood because one, I think GRC is actually the burden of most of the roles that we find out in industry. It's the greatest demand. And part of that is because GRC is the existential foundation for a business to operate, right? It isn't a risk I get to choose. It is a risk that will happen. I mean, I will get fined. I will get penalized. There will be something that happens, right? I don't have to guess the probability. I have to do it. And this leads to an insight that I've had, which I think helps technical practitioners when they realize this at their level, which is there's two kinds of organizations in the world: those that leadership cares about security and those that they don't. And the point is that the don't, it's not that they don't care, it's that the GRC is the mandatory element that I have to meet. That's the investment I'm going to make. Any additional investment I make is in security and is above and beyond that. And when you realize where they are and where they prioritize you and how they understand you, then you can start to work with that. Because what I see a lot of folks is like, my leadership doesn't get it. They just accept risk, blah, blah, right? You pick all these rationalizations and frustrations when the fundamental way that they are is the starting point to what you have to influence and change.
Yeah, taking an unregulated environment where you have customer requirements. I mean, that's going to be the other side of that, which is we need to push product out the door and we need to answer customer questions, right? Particularly for earlier stage companies that are maybe not even profitable yet. The question specifically around how do you prepare somebody? I think that IT audit is good preparation because it's beyond just the IT side. I mean, if you understand IT audit, you've probably had some interactions with financial audit. You probably understand the role between the operational piece of this and the technical piece of this and the role with auditors, particularly in financial services or healthcare or other highly regulated industries. That can be a great asset. Thinking about what does the organization expect out of their CISO? If they expect really deep core engineering chops, then coming out of IT audit is probably not the best profile. If you're talking fintech or financial services or health tech or healthcare specifically, then that could be a great background, particularly if it's supplemented with some technical skills as well, because now it's, okay, I see both sides of this coin and I know how the auditors are likely to view this thing that they are assessing or auditing. And so that could be incredibly valuable. I think just broadly speaking, diversification of experience through tech risk and audit and GRC combined with some level of operational engineering, security architecture, even if you're not an engineer or an architect, just understanding where those teams are coming from. That's where we see the best leaders and the people who elevate, because they understand the other side of the table. And even though if you're not a security architect, you may not know the plumbing and you won't know the plumbing as well as somebody who is. If you have contextual understanding of, oh, they're pushing back because of this reason, that can go a really long way. And somebody who's coming out of IT audit, but has worked with technical teams and can talk that language at least a little bit, is actually, I think, a really good background for somebody for the right role. And it's probably not the product company. It's probably not the SaaS product company, but other areas could be really valuable.
What makes a recruiter want to work with a CISO and shop them around?
So an interesting question, and probably a fundamental kind of, let's go back to what we do as recruiters. So I'm a retained executive recruiter. I work for clients. I don't work for candidates. Candidates don't pay me. Candidates are great. That's the currency in which we do our work, right? You all are our product, right? We want to present you. We want to present great people. We want to present people who, I'll go back to a search I did for a Fortune 100 industrial company in 2016. The guy's still there. I call him up and I say, why are you still there? It's been 10 years. Probably time to do something else. No, I like it here. My budgets are good, all of that. Okay, so there's all these different extremes. What makes a recruiter want to work with a CISO is somebody who's been recommended to us. So I often ask in an interview, who's in your inner circle? What company do you keep? If you have a challenge, a business challenge, who are the 2 people or 3 people in your circle that you're calling? That tells me a lot. So I think the people who are your mentors and your cohorts, that tells me a lot. And it's also, how do you present yourself? Do you articulate a perspective in a way that resonates not only technically, but also with a business audience? And I think that the best interviews that I have and the best interviews that our clients have are when you start to talk about challenges and not only what you've done and how you solve them, but also for our clients in particular, the best interviews that they have is when they start to talk about challenges that they have in their security program and they walk out of an interview saying, oh my gosh, Sally said that and I never thought about that. That could really solve some of our problems. And then they'll call me and I'll say how the conversation went. We were really brainstorming. Like I have some actual ideas that could potentially be implemented. And even if that person's not selected, I actually learned something in that conversation. So that's what makes the best candidates.
All right. Well, we finally made it through that rash of questions. So the good news is you were inspiring a lot of interest across a whole range, and keep those questions coming, folks. Just a reminder, good questions get thrown into a raffle. So not only do you ask a great question that we all benefit from, but you might potentially win a prize. Oh, and look at that. That sparked another question. So as someone actively earning cybersecurity through hands-on platforms like TryHackMe and certified training, what practical steps would you recommend to start gaining real-world experience and growing into a valuable part of a security team? So I think that the idea here, if I remember correctly, is Collins is coming from an educational background, so academic, and transitioning into more pure industry.
Yeah, a difficult transition, but I think easier the earlier in your career. The later in your career, the more difficult, because in many of those academic environments, it's just a totally different way of thinking about budgeting and thinking about making money, something that, academic doesn't necessarily have to think about. I would say find the right mentor and team. I think, Collins, at the level that you're talking about, many of those roles are going to look similar. Like the tactical day-to-day will look similar from organization to organization. So then it becomes more about culture, it becomes more about leadership, and it becomes, oh, this is a team that I like. This is a team that I get along with. This is a team where I could see myself working for at least 2 to 3 years, ideally. One that I think they understand where you're coming from and they're willing to help scale you up, but where you could maybe teach them other perspectives on things as well. So culture and mentorship, I think, would be paramount. And when you start to get those opportunities and you start to interview, again, going back, are you enjoying these conversations? Are you brainstorming with these people? Do they hear you for who you are? And do you think that you could learn from them? That's, I think, the best way to be part of a valuable team. I mean, we're doing work right now with an investment bank in New York. It's a large company, but a pretty lean team, under 15 people. And we've recruited a couple of people there earlier in their career who have said, this is the best job I've ever had. I have direct line to the CISO. I have direct line to the CIO. The CIO and the CISO know my name. They know my perspective. They value what I have to say. And even though those people are more junior and earlier in their career, they're learning a ton because of that. And their voice is being heard. And so it's really culture, mentorship, and people more than anything else, because I think from a tactical perspective, the work is largely the same.
So we talked about team compositions. Is there some more detail that you can provide on the types of, like, if I'm in finance at certain sizes, what kinds of new skill positions come in there? What do you see as the largest growing skill sets or position types because driven by those kinds of things?
Sure. I think we're seeing a lot more focus on threat management and threat intel. There are more vendor solutions that are leveraging AI and leveraging different technologies, but you still need the interpretation of that in order to manage the risk of it and articulate the risk of that threat environment. Particularly when you're talking about financial services institutions or organizations that really have a target on their back and critical infrastructure, for example, that those threat intelligence roles are exceedingly important. And like I said before, we're not seeing people being replaced by AI. It's people that are being supplemented and helped to be able to do a little bit more and have a little bit more bandwidth. To answer your question on organizational design, it's really interesting. So a few years ago, we were working on 4 searches with 2 clients, both in financial services. In one of the clients, it was a credit card company. Their CISO was responsible for all operational security architecture and engineering, the SOC, all the technical side of security. That was the CISO reporting into the CIO. We also were working on simultaneously, same company, the peer to that role, which was all tech risk, reporting up into the CRO's organization, focused exclusively on GRC and tech risk for security. And that piece of it, somebody who worked very closely with the CISO, but was not in the CISO organization. At about the same time, we were doing work with a subprime mortgage lender that was private equity backed. They had it flipped. So we were doing the CISO search, which reported the chief risk officer responsible for the GRC portion side of the house and what we call, I guess, the second line of defense. And then we had a vice president peer level to that person responsible for all security architecture, engineering, and security operations. And so again, you ask, what is a CISO? And it depends, right? So even in financial services, companies that are in the same sector have CISOs with completely different remits, different reporting structures, and different scope of responsibilities.
Sorry, I was trying to respond to a comment. I've got to do three things at once. The challenges of being host. So how do you see, actually, you know what, I'm going to just jump into the hard question, right? So another debate we have is to search or not to search, right? What is the value of certificates? Are there certificates that have value? Do certificates have too much weight, too little weight? Is it just depends on the hiring manager or the company? What's your approach to certification?
So I think that if there is a specific area, let's take FedRAMP, different than everything else, very specified skill set. Organizations need it. Some of the organizations that need it definitely need it, and those that don't pay any attention to it. If it's something that's that specified, it may be helpful. We've never done it, and we've done FedRAMP searches. We've done searches across the entire security stack. I never once had a client say, we would really like to see X certification. I think it can be helpful. I think it does show bona fides in a specific platform, for example. But the higher you get in an organization, the less relevant it becomes. And so if you're entry level and you're trying to differentiate yourself and you're focusing specifically on AWS, for example, and you want to go get an AWS certification, probably not a bad idea. That can only help you. But there will come a point where that's not a differentiating characteristic, particularly for the roles that we fill. Now, most of what we do are leadership roles, director level and up. Nobody is asking for particular certifications at that level in any area of security ever, at least not in the 10 years I've been doing this.
There you go. There is the expert's opinion on the certification debate, so we don't have to keep having it.
If you find, I would do it if you find it fulfilling and you think that it helps you. I would not do it to say this is going to make me so much more marketable for the next job. So if that's the reason you're doing it, then great, all about it. But if you're like, I hate this program, this is annoying, I don't have the bandwidth for it, but I feel like I should do it to make my resume look better, don't bother.
When it comes to CISOs changing organizational posture and budget in a beneficial way, do the CISOs stay around or would they move on to help other organizations requiring assistance?
I'm not exactly sure what Jeffrey's getting at, but I could try to answer that by saying there are CISOs who put themselves in different buckets. So I'm the build CISO. I take a company that has nothing, I create order out of it. I come up with a mature program over 2 to 3 years. Once it becomes mostly steady state, I go on and do that somewhere else. That's a persona. I'm a post-breach CISO. I come in when everything's really hot and really, really on fire. I settle things down. I work with regulators. I work with media. I get things under control. I go and do the next thing. That's typically very often like Mandiant consultants that then go, the breach specialists who then go to be practitioners. So there are people who do that. There's the this organization has been slapped together through 50 acquisitions. We don't even know what assets we have. We have no discernible mature security program. I come in, I bring order to the chaos. I set it up structurally, then I get out. So there are particular individuals who kind of put themselves in those boxes. There are times, I think that the post-breach specialist is the one that we get called on pretty frequently. If we get referred by a Mandiant consultant who's like, hey, our client just went through this major event. They need to do something, right? They didn't have a CISO, that CISO's out, whatever the case may be, right? So that's a little bit about how kind of people put themselves into boxes, but it's not always that way either.
So Vic meant this as a joke, but it does tie into an element that we do talk about on this. So the key is to not stay long enough to get blamed for the breach. And there is a tension and a conflict right now between CISOs and their organizations around these kinds of things, because we have some public case studies where CISOs were thrown under the bus by their own company, right? We're protecting you. The D&O insurance is good. Our company lawyers, we got you protected. Don't worry about it. We'll get that. Until something crosses the Rubicon. And then suddenly that CISO, those lawyers are no longer helping the CISO. They are now setting up.
The CISO's not paying them.
Yeah.
Like
So
right?
they serve the company, which starts
Of
to be at
course.
odds against when we throw the CISO under the bus for the blame that Vic is joking about here. So this is the dirty underbelly of what's happening in industry right now. So what's going on?
Okay, so the good news is that when I first started doing cyber, I've been in recruiting since 2010. I've been in cyber recruiting since 2013, 2014. And it was earlier on, it was, oh, that person worked for Target or Sony or Anthem. We don't want them. They had a breach. And now it's, I hope your candidates have gone through some sort of breach, because I don't want to be the guinea pig if we get ransomware and this is the first time they've had to engage law enforcement, or this is the first time they've had to be in a real incident response mode. So the good news is that that skill set of being in that fire is being valued. The bad news is the liability challenge has just exploded for people, not only professionally, but personally as well. The holy grail and what I would aspire to if I were CISO is to get indemnified when you take on a new role. The reality is most organizations are not willing to do that, and they're not being required to do that. That hopefully will change with time. I mean, at least we're getting CISOs in title, or they're part of the directors and officers cohort. So if they're not named specifically, they are included in that, assuming that they're operating at the behest of the board and senior leadership, and they're not going rogue or doing anything crazy, which hopefully is everybody on the call. So I think that managing that professional and personal liability is really challenging now, because it is your name. If you're the CISO, it is your name on the dotted line. And so when I talk to CISOs at mid-cap companies and they say, I want to do something different, I want to try a different challenge, I want to make more money, whatever the case may be, I'll say to them, well, you could, you don't have to think about your career as CISO for $500 million company, and then CISO for $1 billion company, and CISO for $2.5 billion company. You could be a CISO at a $500 million company and then go be an executive director level, VP level, number 2 at a really large organization. And then your name's not on the dotted line either. So that's one way to think about it. We will have a blog coming out soon. We partner, we as in Artico, me specifically, we have a partnership with Munich Reventures. We did an event in New York and just all about this. We had a panel of attorneys, policy writers, practitioners with me moderating. We're going to do the same thing in California in July. So follow me on LinkedIn and you'll see some information on that. But it's basically all about this topic, and we'll have a blog post coming out either shortly after the event or right before to put some of this into perspective.
Do you look for different skill sets in fractional CISOs or virtual CISOs? So between the full-time position and then the fractional CISO, or what is a fractional CISO?
Yeah, I don't really get involved in that realm too much, because when an organization is ready to move on from a vCISO to a fractional CISO to bring on holistic leadership, that's when we get the call. Fractional CISO, as I understand it, is probably somebody who's serving as a consultant for multiple organizations, serving as that head of security, but not full-time anywhere. Beyond that, yeah, Michael, I don't have a huge perspective there, because it's usually when organizations move on from there that we get engaged.
Okay, we're coming up on the lightning round here. So let's get that question off. There we go. So what other things do you want to share? Your free spot.
Yeah, look, I mean, think about not only where you want to take your career for the next immediate role, but just how you think about this universe of security and the segment of security broadly. We're definitely seeing convergence of tech and security. I would much rather be a security practitioner right now than an aspiring CIO, because quite frankly, I don't know what the CIO's role is going to look like in 5 years, considering that our clients that have converged roles of head of technology and security, they're looking for security practitioners who know enough about IT to take those roles. They are not looking at IT infrastructure people with enough security to take those roles. So, keep abreast in what's going on in the security talent market in general. Read our reports. There's some great insight into kind of next generation scope and leadership and how the role continues to evolve. And especially if you're earlier in your career, if you have an area that's emerging that is of interest to you, go to your leadership and say, hey, I don't know if this scope is going to fall under our remit or is under our remit already, but I would love to be on a cross-functional team. I would love to take on a cross-functional project or things like this to continue to expand your skill set, because the more diversified you can be in your background, the more marketable you'll be later. Way more marketable than the certification piece. Diversify your actual practical experience. It'd be a much better use of time and money.
Also, the dirty secret, which ties back to where I was answering in LinkedIn to Collins about mentorship, is your personal social network. A lot of these things come around not because you see them on monster.com or public posted, but because of relationships. So getting an understanding of an organization, having somebody who's going to vouch for you there, getting the warm introduction to any position is always the best way in. And then back to what I was telling Collins, like, how do I find a mentor? Well, it starts with the social network that you build, right? So the skills aren't just certifications or the technical things or the CTFs that we do. It's also the discussions that we have. And I can tell you again, going back to the very beginning of this broadcast, where Steve and I, a lot of what we learn is from the conversations we're having with CISOs all over the country all the time. They share what they're going through. They share their frustrations. They share what works. And so our insights, and again, this is why I thought what Steve brought to this broadcast was so interesting. He did a bunch of survey data. So we have real technical quantitative insights on patterns versus an anecdote. And then we have the case studies and the stories that we both have of working and talking with these CISOs. And you too can do that, right? These CISOs are not the mythical unicorn that sits there in fantasy world. They're real live people. And if you build a relationship with them, you can understand and get all of these things directly. So my point in this, for the next job, for the skill up, for the understanding of industry beyond just the technical, but cultural relationships, business, organization, you get that from discussion from people that you know that like to talk to you. And if you build a relationship strong enough, then you have the potential for a mentor, right? A lot of people think a mentor is just like, I convinced somebody important to return my phone calls. No, a mentorship is actually a more formal relationship of specific goals that you have. And those can be educational, those can be aspirational, those can be professional. And this person helps you because they want to, not because they have to, right? There's no place to sign up where people are like, I have to like help 3 people this year. They do it because they like you enough, right? There's enough of a friendship. There's enough capital there that they want to do this. But this is incumbent on you. And I think a lot of folks don't know how to do that and are scared because we tend to be a little bit more of an introverted, antisocial group. But it is a requirement once you get to that, that you have to have relationship skills. And what better way to do it than to cultivate them naturally to get the help that you need?
Yeah, I would also add that mentors are mentoring you and spending their time because they see something in you. And so they're picking up on something that they see that you can accelerate your career. They could see you doing more. And that's just a vote of confidence from them, which is great.
All right, let's see if I can, here we go. So we're going to do the drawing. So everybody who did a good question got put in to the wheel of winning. Completely random.
Is this powered by AI?
This is not powered by AI. This is a very simple web page. And Alexander is the winner. So Alexander, if you are on, how do I stop doing that? Contact us at info@scythe.io. And we will get you a coupon code to the swag store so you can get your free unicorn swag. So congratulations and thank you. Steve, what's the final word to close us out?
Think holistically. Try to think like a business person. You have your major. You have your credentials in security. Start thinking broadly.
Steve, thank you so much for enjoying this. For all of you, we've got a ton of viewers and some phenomenal questions. Again, your questions are what make this great. Your engagement and getting you what you need is the purpose of the show. From my side, I know a lot of awesome people because I'm lucky enough to be that they have to be forced to be in a room with me. So then they agree to more mistakes and come on the show with me. But that's what we're doing. So once or twice a month, stay tuned for more. Steve, phenomenal episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bryson. This was fun. Thanks for all the questions and engagement, everybody.